In this video, I'm going to show you how to replace the inner tie rods on this Toyota Tacoma. Let's install these TRQ inner tie rods. Let's remove the wheel. You can either use a thin wall 21mm socket or use a little pry bar screwdriver. Pull this cap off. Now you can use a regular size socket to get all the 5 21mm lug nuts off. With those off, remove the wheel. Let's break free the jam nut that locks the inner and outer tie rod together. This is a 22mm in size, so put a wrench on it. Break it free. Sometimes you might have to tap the wrench with a hammer. Once it's loose, let's move on to removing the outer tie rod castle nut. This castle nut has a cotter pin here that we have to remove. If yours is seized and doesn't want to come off, you're just going to have to cut it flush with the end of the tie rod here, or the nut, and then hammer a socket over. But sometimes you can grab it with cutters and kind of walk it out. There we go. Discard this, don't reuse cotter pins. If you still have the original mounting nut, should be a 17mm socket. Mine is not, and it's an 18. Take that off. Tap the side of the knuckle with a hammer, and this stud should break free and pop out of the knuckle. Now to remove the outer tie rod, count the threads that it takes to take it off. That way when you put it back on, you can put it back the same amount of threads and get your alignment close. Of course, you will still need an alignment after this job, but this will get you close. If your mounting nut is free, go ahead and take it off. Mine is a little bit stuck, so I'm going to use some locking pliers on the inner tie rod here, clamp them down tight, and then I'm going to put a 22mm socket on and zip this off. There we go. Once it got onto the clean threads, it was no problem, but it was a little bit stuck here where it was. Remove the pliers, grab some pliers, and remove the clamp off of the tie rod bellow boot. Take a pry bar and a hammer and tap the clamp that's on the inside here. This is a one-time use clamp, unless someone has already replaced it. You basically want to just get it off and knock it free so that we can remove this boot. Ooh. There we go. Take this off. And now you can pull the boot straight off. The inner tie rod is locked on with a washer that's peened over on each side. There's one here and one underneath. Take a pry bar or whatever you have that will basically chisel this open and unlock it by prying the washer back out. Make sure it's either flat or bent outward the other way. That way it can let go of the tie rod. Do the same on the other side. Grab some large pliers, lock it on, and break it free. Unscrew it the rest of the way. When you do, take this washer off with it. We're not going to reuse this. The new tie rod should come with a new one. There it is. Now take the new tie rod, make sure this washer is on it, and thread it into the steering rack. Make sure it threads on smoothly. Now this washer is going to have two little pins that need to lock on the steering rack. So as you can see, it moves around a little, but it doesn't spin. And then as I'm holding that, I'm threading in the tie rod to basically clamp that washer down. If it's not locked into the two grooves that it needs to go into, it's not going to be able to do its job and lock the tie rod in, even if you bend it over. At this point, I'm going to grab my pliers and give this just a quick twist. I don't want to damage the steering rack by over twisting it. Right here, it's pretty much bottomed out. I'm gonna give it a little extra, and that's it. That's where I'm gonna leave it. It doesn't need to be extremely tight. It will get locked in with the washer. Speaking of, at this point, you wanna take your hammer and just squish the two ends over. This one's a little bit easier to get to, so I'm gonna start with this one. There we go. That's peened over. Now you do the same to the top one. Sometimes you can get some large pliers in here, up and over, and kind of just crush it in place. If you can't get a hammer in there. There we go. Doesn't have to be perfect, just needs to be bent over a little. Take the packet of grease that the tie rod came with and put it in here. Work it into the joint. Put this up like that. Put the rest of the grease down here. Get that packed in there. Obviously you're not going to be able to push it in and through the joint, but just make sure it's covered. That way it'll work in there over time, and it's going to sit here just as a reserve of grease so that it doesn't run out. There we go. Whatever else I have left on my thumb here, I'm just going to put right along this ridge. This is where the boot sits. Once it's on, this ridge is where it locks in. And if you put it here, it's actually going to help out the alignment professional, because as they spin the tie rod, the boot isn't going to want to spin with it. It'll just slide over. Take your boot, slide it over. That's locked in on here, but I'm going to pull it further a little bit. Actually, I'm going to go on the other side and turn the steering wheel. That's going to bring the tie rod closer to the rack. This will make it easier for me to install the boot. Make sure it goes up and over the rack, and unless you have one of the metal clamps with the special tool, what you can do is use a wire tie and just wire tie this. Make it nice and snug, and it should be good to go. Grab some pliers so I can make sure that that's tight. By hand, it's a little bit difficult. If you grab the wire tie and twist it, that'll pull it through its locking clip here. Once it gets snug, cut off the excess so it doesn't dangle around. And there you have it. The outer clamp, if it's in poor condition, replace it. Mine's good, so I'm going to put it back. Before you lock it in, make sure the boot is sitting in its groove. Mine is. Make sure this is centered. I like to coat the threads here with some anti-seize or grease if that's what you have. This will make sure that the jam nut as well as the outer tie rod won't seize on here in the future, especially since this truck lives in a very rusty climate. You don't need a whole lot. And at this point, once you have that on, you can put on the jam nut, thread it on, drive it in all the way. I'm going to do that a little faster with my power tool. There we go. Take any excess grease or anti-seize that came off, put it back at the front here on the beginning of the threads. Take the outer tie rod, thread it on the same amount of turns that it took to take it off. Just as a reminder, once again, you do need an alignment, but this will get you close. That's about where mine was. I'm going to bring the jam nut closer, and now let's put it into the knuckle. Put it through, put on the castle nut, snug this up. When you torque this, if you have the two-wheel drive version, the torque will be 53 foot-pounds. If you have the four-wheel drive version, it'll be 67 foot-pounds. So that's 53. Mine is a two-wheel drive version, so that's what I'm going to. You want to make sure that the castle nut is lined up with the slot in the tie rod. Mine is, so I'm good to go. If yours is not, continue tightening. Even if it's close, don't loosen the nut to get it to line up. Put the cotter pin in. Once again, always use a new cotter pin. And then bend it over to lock it in. There we go. Snug up the jam nut. The torque for this is 40 foot-pounds. However, if you don't have anything to torque it with, just make it snug. Your alignment professional should take care of it anyway. There we go. And now bring it back about level so that the outer tie rod doesn't sit at an angle. Let's get the wheel back on. Start on all 5 of your lug nuts. Bottom them out in a cross pattern, and then also in a cross pattern, tighten them to 83 foot-pounds. Once again, 83 foot-pounds for all these lug nuts in a cross pattern. After finishing this repair, it's important to have an alignment done on your vehicle. And if your truck had the center caps, go ahead and put these back on.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.